Bye. The room went quiet before anyone understood why. Cameras were ready for the usual rhythm of a star athlete addressing the press. Microphones angled like routine, reporters leaning forward with their notebooks half open, expecting the familiar language of seasons and schedules. Then Irvin Magic Johnson lowered his eyes for a fraction of a second and said he had HIV and that he was retiring. In that instant, it did not matter that he was the engine of Showtime, that his passes had turned basketball into a kind of cinematic joy, that he had already stacked championships and awards in a way most players only dream about. The air changed. The silence that followed was not respectful. It was stunned, frightened, unsure of what it meant to share space with a legend who had suddenly become a symbol for something the public did not yet know how to understand. People remember the headline, but fewer remember the feeling behind it, the way a life can fracture in public while a person is still standing, still breathing, still try to keep his voice steady, so the world does not hear how fast his heart is racing. And that is the beginning of the tragedy people rarely want to sit with, because it forces a question we avoid until it finds us. What happens when the thing that made you feel invincible disappears overnight? Not because you stop being great, but because fear decides you are no longer safe to celebrate. Decades later, at 66, when the roar of crowds has thinned into a distant echo and the bright arena lights are replaced by the colder glow of morning routines, the story becomes heavier, not lighter, because time does not erase what a diagnosis did to a man's inner life. It only changes the shape of the battle. The public saw a smile that never seemed to break, a charisma so effortless it looked like joy itself had learned how to dribble. But behind that smile was a childhood that trained him to endure judgment long before he learned how to command a fast break. He grew up in Lansing, Michigan, in a house stretched beyond mercy. 10 children sharing space where privacy barely existed and hardship was not an event, but a constant presence. His father worked brutal shifts and drove a garbage truck. His mother scrubbed school floors until fatigue became a language the family understood without speaking. As a boy, he rode weekend routes beside his father, and the pain was not the winter air or the weight of work. It was the stare of neighbors and the laughter that tried to make a child feel smaller for helping his family survive. That kind of humiliation does not vanish when success arrives. It burrows in, and later, when the world watches you, you recognize the same eyes, just dressed in a nicer suit. The tragedy is that Magic's life became a long education in how attention can be love one day and suspicion the next. Even as a teenager, he learned what it meant to walk into spaces where you were physically present but socially rejected, where the ball did not come to you, where conversations died when you entered a room, where belonging felt conditional. So he built a private sanctuary before the sun rose, empty outdoor courts where the cold could burn his skin, but no one could take his dignity. He practiced until rhythm became refuge, until each dribble sounded like a refusal to be erased. That hunger forged brilliance, but it also forged armor, and armor is useful until the day it becomes too heavy to carry. The world calls him a survivor because he kept living after 1991, because he rebuilt when the game was taken from him, because he transformed loss into a new kind of power. But the heartbreak is not simply that he lost basketball in his prime. The heartbreak is that he was forced to watch how quickly admiration can tighten into fear, how quickly people who once celebrated your presence can hesitate to touch you, how quickly a locker room can stop feeling like home. It is a lonely thing to be alive and still feel as if you have been placed on the other side of a glass wall. And as the years passed, the tragedy expanded beyond one man's body and into the most vulnerable place of all, his family. Love arrived, plans were made, a marriage began, and then the diagnosis dropped into that home like a sudden storm, turning ordinary days into careful calculations, turning the future into something that had to be earned one morning at a time. This is why, when you look at him now, you should not only see the trophies, the highlights, the business success, or the famous smile. You should see a man who has carried the weight of public fear, private pain, and the relentless discipline of survival for decades. A man who learned early that life can test your dignity in public and your courage in silence. And the question that lingers at the edge of his story is not about basketball at all. It is about what remains when applause fades, when identity is interrupted, and when you have to find a way to stand again without the one thing that once made standing feel effortless. If the announcement in 1991 shattered the illusion of invincibility, the truth is that Magic Johnson had been learning how to survive shattering moments long before the cameras ever crowded around him. Long before the HIV diagnosis, long before the championships and the billion-dollar empire, there was a boy in Lansing who understood something brutal at an early age. The world does not always clap for your effort. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it judges. Sometimes it decides who you are before you have the chance to introduce yourself. And that early education and endurance would become the invisible backbone of everything that followed. He was born into a home where space was limited, but expectations were not. 10 children under one roof meant noise, movement, shared beds, shared dreams, and shared burdens. His father worked long shifts at a General Motors plant, then drove a garbage truck through neighborhoods that looked at him but did not truly see him. His mother cleaned school floors until her hands ached, returning home with a tiredness that settled into the walls. For young Irvin, dignity was not theoretical. It was something you had to protect daily. When he rode with his father on weekend garbage routes, the work itself did not embarrass him. The stares did. The laughter did. The whispering that followed him back to school did. Being called trash boy was not just teasing. It was a reminder that people believe your circumstances defined your ceiling. That kind of humiliation can fracture a child's confidence, but in his case it did something else. It planted a quiet defiance. It made him ask, even if he did not yet have the language for it, why doing what is right could still make you feel small. That question deepened when school integration reshaped his path. He expected one high school. He was sent to another. Everett High was overwhelmingly white, and not all corners were welcoming. He walked into gyms where warmth cooled the moment he stepped in. Teammates hesitated to pass him the ball. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Coaches evaluated him through a lens clouded by bias. The message was subtle but persistent. You are here, but you do not fully belong. For a teenager already carrying the weight of public judgment, that isolation could have hardened into bitterness. Instead, it redirected his energy. He did not argue for belonging. He trained for it. Before sunrise, while most of Lansing still slept, he found empty courts behind his neighborhood. Winter cut through his clothes. His fingers numbed around the basketball. But the court did not care about race, reputation, or ridicule. It asked for repetition. It rewarded discipline. The no-look passes that would later mesmerize arenas were not born from flair alone. They were born from necessity. If teammates did not trust you, you learned to see angles they did not. If rooms closed around you, you learned to create space that no one could deny. Each early morning practice was not simply about improving skill. It was about reclaiming dignity. Dribble after dribble, he transformed insult into rhythm, doubt into muscle memory. Then came the night that changed everything. A high school game where the stat line seemed almost fictional. 36 points, 18 rebounds, 16 assists. A local reporter looked at the performance and said the word that would follow him forever. Magic. It sounded like destiny. It also felt like pressure. A nickname that grand can feel like a crown or a burden, depending on how steady your hands are. His mother reminded him gently that such power belongs to God. The lesson was clear. Talent is a gift, not ownership. Humility would have to coexist with brilliance. But destiny rarely travels alone. In 1976, his closest friend Reggie Chastain died in a car accident. Reggie had been more than a teammate. He was shelter, the person who saw Irvin, not the labels attached to him, the one who told him he mattered when others tried to minimize him. Grief at 17 does not come with instructions. It arrives like a rupture. For weeks, he stood before Reggie's empty locker, pressing his fingers to cold metal, whispering promises that only he could hear. When Everett High won the Michigan State Championship the following year, He lifted the trophy toward the rafters not in celebration, but in dedication. It was not a party. It was a vow. Success would not erase loss. It would honor it. That emotional layering, triumph braided with grief, shaped the competitor he became. Michigan State University in 1977 introduced a new stage and a new level of scrutiny. Coach Judd Heathcote's practices were relentless. Film sessions dissected mistakes without mercy. Expectations tightened. Yet for someone who had already endured public doubt and private heartbreak, pressure was familiar territory. By the time a 1979 NCAA championship game arrived with Larry Bird on the other side of the court, it was more than a matchup. It was a collision of narratives, of small-town grit and national spotlight. When Magic led Michigan State to victory, the country saw charisma. They saw the smile. They saw the showmanship. What they did not fully see was the endurance beneath it. He was not simply playing to win a title. He was playing for the boy who had been laughed at, for the father who worked 2 jobs, for the friend whose locker remained forever empty in memory. That win propelled him into the NBA, and with it, into a furnace of expectations. The Los Angeles Lakers drafted him in 1979. Hollywood shimmered around him, but the lights did not feel gentle. Veterans questioned his joy. Critics dismissed his creativity as gimmick. A league accustomed to a certain hardness was unsure what to do with a player who smiled so freely. Then came a 1980 NBA Finals. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar injured. Panic spreading. A rookie asked to fill a void no one his age should have been expected to carry. Magic stepped forward and delivered one of the most astonishing performances in finals history, playing all 5 positions, scoring 42 points, grabbing 15 rebounds, and guiding the Lakers to a championship. Cameras captured the grin. They did not capture the trembling legs, the counted breaths, the silent plea to simply remain upright. By the end of the decade, he had 5 championships, 3 MVP awards, and had helped transform the NBA into a global spectacle. Contracts grew, arenas filled. The Showtime era redefined the sport's identity. On the surface, it was a golden age. But brilliance always extracts a price. 82 game seasons, cross-country flights, relentless media attention, and physical collisions layered quietly into his body. Some nights, he lay on locker room floors staring at the ceiling, whispering for strength to stand the next day. Not even among teammates was attention free from envy. By the late 1980s, Magic Johnson stood at the summit of basketball, adored and untouchable in appearance. Yet beneath the glow of championships and endorsement deals, something fragile lingered. A life built on endurance was about to face a test no arena, no trophy, no training session could prepare it for. And when that moment came in November 1991, it would not only alter his career, it would redefine what survival truly meant. When Magic Johnson stood before the cameras on November 1991 and announced that he had tested positive for HIV, the shock was immediate, but the deeper rupture unfolded more slowly. Retirement was not just a professional decision. It was a sudden erasure of routine, identity, and the one space that had always translated his pain into purpose. For 12 seasons, the court had been more than hardwood and lines. It had been sanctuary. It had been language. And now, at 32 years old, still physically dominant, he was told by circumstance that he could no longer live inside the only environment that had ever felt unquestionably his. The silence that followed his announcement was not only public. It seeped inward. For years, Magic had defined himself by motion. Fast breaks, no-look passes, quick decisions. Now life demanded stillness. Medical appointments replaced game film. Blood work replaced box scores. Conversations shifted from championships to viral loads. In 1991, HIV was not widely understood. Treatments were limited. Fear traveled faster than fact. Some believed he would not live another decade. Others quietly questioned whether he should ever return to the game in any capacity. He felt that shift in real time. Teammates who once embraced him hesitated, not out of cruelty, but uncertainty. League officials moved cautiously. Commentators debated his future as if he were a risk assessment rather than a human being. The same attention that once celebrated his brilliance now studied his body with suspicion. The tragedy was not simply that he was ill. It was that admiration turned into distance overnight. And yet, he refused to disappear quietly. In February 1992, he returned to the NBA All-Star Game. The atmosphere was tense, divided between support and apprehension. But once the ball tipped, instinct took over. He scored 25 points, hit a dramatic three-pointer late in the game, and walked away with the All-Star MVP award. For a brief moment, the roar of the crowd sounded like restoration. It felt as though the narrative had shifted from fear back to excellence. But even that victory carried weight. Behind the applause were ongoing debates about safety. Some players expressed discomfort. Talk radio questioned the league's decision. Magic understood that every step back onto the court required not only physical readiness, but emotional resilience. Being doubted for your health is different from being doubted for your skill. One questions your game. The other questions your existence. He attempted a comeback during the 1992-93 season, but ultimately stepped away again, recognizing that the scrutiny would never fully recede. Later, in 1996, he made one final return as a player, older, stronger, determined to show that he could still compete at a high level. The performance was respectable. The body held up. But the league had changed. The rhythm was different. The generation was new. After 32 games, he retired for good. The second retirement felt quieter, more final. There was no illusion that the court would welcome him back again. And for a man who had spent his entire adult life defining himself through performance, that final separation cut deeply. When identity is tied to motion, stillness can feel like erasure. He tried coaching the Lakers in the 1993-94 season, hoping proximity to the game might restore something that retirement had stripped away. But coaching is a different kind of authority. The roster struggled. The chemistry was strained. The results did not mirror his playing career. After just 16 games, the experiment ended. It was another reminder that greatness in one role does not guarantee comfort in another. For many athletes, this would have marked the beginning of a long fade into nostalgia. Appearances at halftime ceremonies, commentary, occasional endorsements. But Magic's internal wiring did not allow for passive decline. He had grown up in a house where survival required initiative. Waiting had never been an option, so he rebuilt. In the early 1990s, while much of the sports world speculated about his longevity, he began walking through neglected neighborhoods in Los Angeles. He studied empty storefronts, shuttered theaters, and communities overlooked by major corporations. Where others saw risk, he saw familiarity. He had grown up in places considered marginal. He understood what it meant to feel ignored. His first significant project was revitalizing the Baldwin Hills Theater. Banks were skeptical. Investors were cautious. Many advised him to stick to sports and endorsements. But rejection did not intimidate him. It felt like high school all over again, rooms that did not quite believe in him. The theater reopened. It thrived. Families returned. Foot traffic increased. Jobs were created. It was not just a business success. It was proof of concept. Corporate America had long assumed that certain neighborhoods lacked viable markets. Magic challenged that assumption directly. He went on to form partnerships that brought recognizable brands into underserved communities. The strategy was simple but radical. Invest where others look away. The returns were strong. Eventually, he exited some partnerships with significant profit, but the underlying mission remained consistent. Economic inclusion was not charity. It was smart business. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, his portfolio expanded into real estate, insurance, private equity, and sports ownership. Magic Johnson Enterprises became more than a post-career experiment. It became a platform. Over time, his net worth climbed into the billions. He joined ownership groups for major sports franchises, including the Los Angeles Dodgers and later the Washington Commanders. He moved from player to power broker. But wealth did not erase the discipline that had sustained him since 1991. HIV remained a daily presence. Antiretroviral therapy improved dramatically over the decades, transforming what had once been a death sentence into a manageable condition. Yet management is not ease. It is routine. It is adherence. It is swallowing pills at the same time every day, attending appointments without fail, adjusting lifestyle choices with precision. Each morning, he wakes with intention. Exercise is not vanity, it is strategy. Diet is not preference, it is protection. Every decision carries an awareness that longevity is earned daily. Survival is not automatic. At 66, the tragedy of Magic Johnson is not that he failed. It is that he has had to repeatedly reinvent himself under conditions most people never face. Poverty, public humiliation, the death of a close friend, sudden illness, forced retirement, stigma, reinvention, the strain of being watched constantly, the pressure of representing more than oneself. And yet, perhaps the most difficult evolution has not been professional, but personal. Because success in business and sports can be measured in numbers. Success as a husband and father cannot. Those chapters would test him in ways no defender ever could. And as the years unfolded, the battles inside his home would reveal a different kind of endurance, one that required vulnerability instead of bravado, listening instead of leading, and love without conditions. The next phase of his story would not be played under arena lights. It would unfold in living rooms, hospital corridors, and quiet conversations that reshaped what strength truly meant. If the first half of Magic Johnson's life was defined by speed, spectacle, and survival in public, the second half would be defined by something far less visible and far more demanding: responsibility in private. Because once the cameras dim and the business headlines settle, what remains are the relationships you either nurtured or neglected while the world was cheering. Long before the HIV announcement, before the business empire, before the carefully structured reinvention, there were choices made at 21 years old that would echo for decades. In 1981, Melissa Mitchell gave birth to his first son, Andre. At that moment, Magic was still ascending, barely able to process the magnitude of fame unfolding around him. He was a champion, a brand, a rising global figure. But fatherhood does not slow down for branding. He would later admit something that carries more weight than any trophy. He did not yet know how to be a father. The NBA calendar consumed him. Flights blurred into appearances. Endorsements multiplied. Melissa carried the daily rhythm of raising a child, while he carried the expanding pressure of being Magic. Their relationship did not collapse in scandal or dramatic confrontation. It thinned. Distance is rarely explosive. It is gradual. It builds through missed birthdays, shortened calls, and promises to be present next time. The regret that followed him was not public. It was quiet. You cannot replay first words. You cannot retrieve the nights you were not there. Even as Andre grew and eventually reconnected with his father in adulthood, joining Magic Johnson Enterprises in a leadership role, the early absence remained part of the story. Healing does not erase the beginning. It acknowledges it. Then came Cookie. Erlitha Cookie Kelly met Magic at Michigan State before the world crowned him. She did not fall in love with an empire. She met a young man still uncertain about his own scale. Their relationship moved in uneven rhythms: breakups, reconciliations, long separations caused by travel and rising fame. But something steady persisted. Cookie saw the vulnerability beneath the charisma. On September 14, 1991, they married. The timing felt like stability, like adulthood finally catching up with success. Cookie was pregnant with her first child, EJ. The future seemed ordered. Then, just weeks later, Magic learned he was HIV positive. Few moments in modern sports history carry the emotional density of that sequence. Newly married, expecting a child, suddenly facing a diagnosis that, at the time, carried enormous fear and limited medical clarity. Cookie later described feeling as if the floor disappeared beneath her. For a pregnant woman, the fear is doubled. Not only is your partner's life uncertain, but your child's health is also unknown. They waited for test results in a state of suspended breath. Cookie tested negative. The baby tested negative. Relief came, but it did not erase the shock. Instead, it marked the beginning of a different kind of marriage, one built not on romance, but on endurance. Public reaction was harsh. Cookie endured whispers suggesting she stayed for money or status. Those assumptions ignored the complexity of what she chose: uncertainty. Life beside someone whose future was not guaranteed. A marriage under scrutiny. She stayed not because it was easy, but because she believed in the vows spoken weeks earlier. For Magic, guilt became a companion. He wrestled privately with the possibility of dying young, of leaving Cookie to raise their child alone. That fear stripped away the performer. There is no charisma in a hospital waiting room, no highlight reel in a doctor's office. Over time, the discipline that once fueled his athletic career shifted toward health management and family stability. Antiretroviral therapy improved. Life expectancy projections changed. The diagnosis that once sounded like a countdown became a condition to manage. But management requires vigilance, daily medication, strict adherence, constant monitoring. Then fatherhood expanded again. In 2013, his son EJ came out publicly as a gay man. For many parents, such a moment is personal and private. For Magic Johnson, it unfolded under media glare. His initial reaction was not rejection. It was fear, not of who EJ was, but of how the world might treat him. Magic understood ridicule. He understood being singled out. He did not want his son to inherit that burden. Cookie anchored the moment with clarity: love first, learn second. Magic listened. Growth does not happen in speeches. It happens in conversation, in admitting that your instincts may be shaped by a different era. Over time, he became vocal in his support, embracing EJ not as a challenge to his identity, but as an extension of his family. He later reflected that EJ helped him become a better man. That evolution mattered. Strength shifted from commanding respect to protecting authenticity. Then, in 2018, another storm struck. His daughter Elisa experienced a home invasion. Armed intruders forced entry. She fled barefoot into the night. The call that reached Magic fractured something deeper than any professional setback ever had. In that moment, there were no business titles, no ownership stakes, no influence that could reverse time. He described feeling powerless in a way he never had before. Championships could not guard a hallway. Wealth could not undo fear. When he wrapped his arms around her afterward, the only thing that mattered was that she was alive. These family crises reframed his understanding of control. For decades, he had built a life around preparation, discipline, and strategic thinking. But parenthood introduces variables no training can eliminate. The lesson became stark. You cannot shield the people you love from every danger. You can only show up when the storm passes through. At 66, the tragedy of Magic Johnson is not defined by defeat. It is defined by exposure. Exposure to illness, to stigma, to regret, to vulnerability as a father and husband. The world still sees the smile, the net worth, the ownership stakes. But inside his home, the victories are quieter. They're measured in conversations that did not turn into distance, in medical routines followed without fail, in apologies spoken sincerely, in hands held during sleepless nights, in showing up consistently when fear is loud. Because ultimately, the hardest evolution for a man once called Magic was not learning how to win. It was learning how to remain human when the illusion of invincibility disappeared. And that transformation continues, not in arenas, but in the ordinary, disciplined choices that hold a family together when applause is gone. By the time Magic Johnson entered his 60s, the world had already rewritten his narrative more than once. From basketball prodigy to global icon, from HIV diagnosis to business magnate, from public symbol to private father. On paper, it looks like reinvention layered neatly over adversity. But lived from the inside, reinvention is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is disciplined. It is built on mornings when motivation is absent and consistency is the only thing holding the structure upright. For more than 3 decades, Magic has lived with a condition that, in 1991, was widely assumed to be a death sentence. The medicine evolved. The prognosis improved. Public understanding shifted. But the routine never became optional. HIV does not disappear because the headlines move on. It remains present, managed, negotiated daily. Every morning begins with intention. Medication must be taken at the same time. Missed doses are not small mistakes. They are risks. Blood work is not occasional. It is routine. Doctor visits are not symbolic. They are strategic. Even when he feels strong, the discipline cannot relax. Survival is not luck. It is adherence. There are mornings when his body reminds him of the years it has endured. Decades of NBA collisions left their imprint. Chronic back pain lingers. Joint stiffness surfaces before the sun fully rises. Some days his lower back burns in slow, persistent waves. Other days fatigue sits heavier than usual. None of it makes headlines, but it shapes his day before the world sees him smiling at an event or speaking in a boardroom. Pain management becomes part of identity. Stretching is not optional. Strength training is not vanity. Cardio is not aesthetic. It is resistance. It is a declaration that the body will not quietly surrender territory. There is something symbolic in the image of Magic alone in a gym before dawn, treadmill humming, breath steadying. The same discipline that once sharpened his jump shot now sustains his immune system. People often comment that he looks younger than his age. They see the polished public image. They do not see the nights when sleep fractures in his segments, when discomfort interrupts rest, when medication unsettles his stomach. Cookie hears the small shifts in the dark before he speaks. Her hand on his chest is not romantic symbolism. It is reassurance grounded in decades of shared vigilance. Living long-term with HIV also carries a psychological dimension. In the early 1990s, friends and commentators speculated openly about how long he would live. Even as treatments improved, the memory of that early uncertainty lingers. When you have once been told your life expectancy may be limited, every year beyond that forecast feels borrowed. Gratitude becomes sharper. So does awareness. Yet he never allowed his diagnosis to shrink his influence. If anything, it expanded his sense of responsibility. Through the Magic Johnson Foundation, he has invested heavily in HIV and AIDS awareness, testing programs, and healthcare access. The cause is not abstract. It is personal. He understands the fear that accompanies a diagnosis. He understands the stigma that isolates people before illness even does. Financial success followed his business ventures, but money has never insulated him from time. At 66, wealth does not cancel vulnerability. It can provide comfort, access to care, security for family. But it cannot eliminate mortality. It cannot erase the years of physical wear. It cannot prevent random crises. His empire, sports ownership, private equity, insurance, infrastructure, continues to expand methodically. He sits in boardrooms where decisions move capital across cities and industries. He is part of ownership groups shaping the future of professional sports franchises. His net worth surpasses $1.5 billion. Yet even at that altitude, routine governs his stability more than revenue does. At home, the rhythm is slower. Public appearances are measured. Travel is strategic rather than constant. Health appointments are built into the calendar. Time with family is not squeezed in. It is protected. Andre works within the business structure. EJ moves confidently in media and culture. Elisa lives more privately, having navigated her own trauma. Cookie remains the anchor. Marriage after more than 3 decades becomes less about passion and more about partnership. They have survived diagnosis, scrutiny, fear, public misunderstanding, and parenting challenges. Longevity in marriage mirrors longevity in health. It requires daily choice. There are no viral announcements about consistency. There are no trophies for showing up repeatedly. But showing up is what holds the structure intact. The tragedy of Magic Johnson at 66 is subtle. It is not collapse. It is not scandal. It is the weight of constant maintenance. The discipline required to remain stable when many expected decline. The humility required to follow doctors' orders after once commanding arenas. The patience required to accept that some days the body sets the pace. He once thrived on speed. Now he thrives on steadiness. The irony is striking. The man whose career was defined by fast breaks and improvisation now depends on routine and predictability. Precision has replaced spontaneity. The same mind that once read defenses now reads lab results. The same competitive instinct that once attacked opponents now defends his own health. And yet, there is no bitterness in that evolution. If anything, there is clarity. Basketball gave him fame. Illness gave him perspective. Business gave him control. Family gave him meaning. Discipline ties it all together. At 66, he understands something younger athletes rarely grasp. Talent accelerates you, but structure sustains you. Applause amplifies you, but routine protects you. Momentum builds reputation, but discipline builds longevity. The public may remember Magic Johnson for no-look passes and championship parades. But the deeper story is this. Every sunrise he reaches for the same pill, laces the same shoes for early exercise, checks in with the same doctors, chooses the same commitment to family. It is not glamorous. It is not dramatic. It is relentless. And that relentlessness, more than any title, is what has allowed him to remain standing when so many once predicted he would fall. By the time Magic Johnson crossed into his mid-60s, the narrative around him had settled into something polished and almost mythic. Billionaire, survivor, icon, owner, philanthropist. The smile remained intact, the posture confident, the public presence controlled. But beneath that composed exterior, there exists a quieter reckoning that no financial report or highlight reel can capture. The emotional cost of living 3 decades inside awareness of mortality. When you are diagnosed at 32 with a virus the world barely understands, you do not simply resume life once treatment improves. You live with the memory of what that moment felt like. You remember how rooms went silent. You remember how some people stepped back physically, uncertain if proximity carried risk. You remember reading headlines that sounded less like coverage and more like obituaries written too early. Even as medicine advanced and HIV became manageable with antiretroviral therapy, the psychological imprint did not disappear. It changed shape. Instead of fearing sudden decline, the fear becomes subtler. It becomes vigilance. It becomes the understanding that your health depends on precision. That routine is not suggestion. It is survival. At 66, Magic understands that his life has been extended by science, but sustained by discipline. There is no complacency in that awareness. The pill bottle on his nightstand is not symbolic. It is central. The medication must be taken at the same time every day. Travel must be planned around access to care. Even stress must be managed deliberately because stress weakens systems already working hard. This is the part of the story that rarely receives applause. Maintenance. Championships are dramatic. Business deals are impressive. But maintenance is repetitive. It requires commitment when nobody is watching. His body reflects decades of intensity. Years in the NBA left behind compressed discs, lingering back pain, stiff joints that no amount of stretching fully erases. Some mornings begin with slow movements, deliberate breathing, a careful test of how cooperative his spine feels. There are days when fatigue arrives earlier than expected. Days when he adjusts schedules quietly rather than push past limits. Yet he refuses to let limitation define the tone of his life. Exercise remains foundational. Early workouts are not nostalgic nods to athletic glory. They are strategic investments in longevity. Cardio supports heart health. Strength training protects bone density. Flexibility reduces strain. Each session is calculated not for aesthetics, but for sustainability. There is humility in this phase. Once, he controlled tempo in packed arenas. Now, He listens to what his body dictates. Once, adrenaline fueled his decisions. Now, moderation guides them. And then there is the emotional layer of aging itself. When you survive something many expected would end you, each birthday carries dual meaning. Celebration and reflection intertwine. Gratitude deepens, but so does awareness of fragility. Friends from earlier eras have passed away. Teammates have faced health crises. Time narrows circles. Magic does not publicly dwell on fear. But long-term survivors often share a quiet question that never fully disappears. How many more years? It is not despair. It is perspective. When tomorrow once felt uncertain, the concept of decades becomes extraordinary. His philanthropic work continues with consistency rather than spectacle. The Magic Johnson Foundation invests in healthcare access, HIV education, and underserved communities. His approach mirrors his health philosophy, sustained involvement over temporary visibility. He does not donate and disappear. He builds infrastructure. He revisits programs. He listens. Ownership stakes in major sports franchises place him in rarefied financial territory. But even in those boardrooms, his mindset reflects his past. Stability over flash. Long-term growth over impulsive gain. Structure over momentum. At home, routine remains sacred. Dinner together when possible. Travel chosen intentionally rather than impulsively. Health updates discussed openly. Cookie remains both partner and protector. Their marriage has evolved beyond romance into strategic companionship. She understands his rhythms. She notices subtle shifts in mood or energy before he articulates them. Shared survival builds a bond few public relationships withstand. There is also the subtle weight of representation. For decades, he has symbolized hope for HIV patients. That visibility carries responsibility. Each public appearance reassures someone living quietly with the same diagnosis. Each healthy year challenges outdated assumptions. But carrying hope for others can be heavy. It means you cannot publicly collapse. It means you must embody resilience even on days when you feel ordinary, even vulnerable. The tragedy of Magic Johnson at 66 is not dramatic downfall. It is the invisible labor of remaining upright. The careful calibration of body, schedule, stress, and purpose. The emotional endurance required to live long enough to redefine your own prognosis. He once said that basketball made him magic, but losing it taught him who he was. At this stage, survival has taught him something deeper. That strength is less about dominance and more about consistency. Less about speed and more about steadiness. He understands now that legacy is not built in the loudest seasons. It is built in the quiet repetition of responsible choices. Waking up, taking medication, exercising, showing up for family, continuing philanthropic work, making measured decisions, listening to doctors, listening to loved ones. At 66, he is not fighting for championships. He is fighting for continuity, for more ordinary mornings, for more family dinners, for more years where his presence reassures others that a diagnosis does not erase possibility. And in that fight, stripped of spectacle, there is something far more powerful than a no-look pass under arena lights. There is a man who has learned to stand not because he feels invincible, but because he understands exactly how fragile life can be, and chooses discipline anyway. At 66, the most remarkable thing about Magic Johnson is not that he survived. It is how he chose to define survival. There was a time when his life moved at the speed of fast breaks and roaring arenas. Championships stacked quickly. Endorsements multiplied. The smile became a brand. Then came a diagnosis. Then the retirement. Then the reinvention. Each chapter looked dramatic from the outside. But the deeper transformation was quieter and far less visible. Because survival, over decades, is not a headline. It is a habit. Magic's life today is structured, almost methodical. His mornings are deliberate. His schedule is measured. His health is monitored with precision. That structure did not arrive naturally to a young man once fueled by adrenaline and instinct. It was learned. It was built. It was enforced through repetition. When basketball ended, he could have drifted into nostalgia. When HIV redefined his future, he could have retreated into fear. Instead, he built systems. Business systems, health systems, family systems. And those systems are what hold him upright now. At this stage, success no longer feels like conquest. It feels like maintenance. He understands something many people only realize late in life. Momentum is temporary. Structure is permanent. The applause fades. The crowd moves on. Markets fluctuate. Public opinion shifts. But discipline, if practiced long enough, becomes stable ground. And yet, even with structure in place, there are moments of quiet reckoning. Aging does not negotiate with reputation. His body carries the residue of a career built on collisions. His immune system still requires vigilance. There are days when fatigue whispers earlier than expected. There are nights when sleep feels lighter than it used to. There are checkups that require steady breathing while waiting for results. The world may see a billionaire sports owner. He sees lab numbers. He sees responsibility. He sees time moving forward without guarantee. But perhaps the most profound shift is not physical. It is philosophical. In his 20s, he played to prove himself. In his 30s, he fought to survive. In his 40s and 50s, he built to secure legacy. In his 60s, he reflects. He reflects on the boy who rode garbage routes with his father and learned that dignity is something you carry internally when the world tries to label you. He reflects on Reggie, the friend whose death carved permanence into his ambition. He reflects on the 1991 press conference that forced him to redefine masculinity, vulnerability, and public courage in a single sentence. He reflects on fatherhood, on the regret of absence and the humility of repair, on learning to listen instead of dictate, on choosing love over instinctive fear when EJ shared his truth, on the powerless terror of waiting in hospital corridors while his children faced danger. There is no championship parade for those lessons. At 66, Magic Johnson is not chasing expansion. He is protecting alignment. Alignment between health and schedule, between wealth and purpose, between influence and responsibility, between public image and private integrity. He no longer needs to outrun anyone. He needs to remain steady. That steadiness is not passive. It is active commitment. It means saying no to excess. It means prioritizing rest over ego. It means keeping medical appointments even when business meetings feel urgent. It means investing in communities not for applause but for continuity. The tragedy in his story is not collapse. It is exposure. Exposure to how fragile identity can be when tied to performance. Exposure to how quickly public affection can transform into caution. Exposure to the limits of money when facing illness or fear for your children. But there is also triumph in that exposure, because he did not allow interruption to become erasure. He did not allow diagnosis to become definition. He did not allow retirement to become irrelevance. He built a second act with patience, and then a third act with purpose. And now, in this quieter phase, he lives with intention. If there is a final lesson in the life of Magic Johnson at 66, it is this: greatness is not proven at the peak. It is proven in continuity after the peak has passed. What holds a life together when the game ends? When the applause fades, when the body changes, when fear enters the room. For him, it has been discipline, faith, structure, love, accountability. He once dazzled millions by making the impossible look easy. Today, his real victory is making responsibility look natural. And perhaps that is the most powerful evolution of all. The boy who once practiced alone in the cold to earn belonging now understands that belonging was never granted by arenas. It was built by character. At 66, Magic Johnson is no longer simply a symbol of basketball brilliance. He is a study in resilience sustained over time, a reminder that survival is not dramatic. It is daily. And every morning he wakes, takes his medication, stretches his aging back, greets his family, and steps into another carefully structured day. he quietly proves that legacy is not written in bursts of glory. It is written in consistency. It is written in discipline. It is written in the choice to stand again, without spotlight, without certainty, without applause, and move forward anyway.